As well as preventing proper legal counsel to defendants, the ICT has been accused of arbitrarily detaining suspects and denying them bail without due cause. There are also some serious allegations of torture, which both Defence Counsel and human rights campaigners say need to be addressed.
I think the Jamaat leaders are being held in appalling conditions. Frequently they're not brought to court. They are all elderly gentlemen with numerous ailments, particularly Professor Ghulam Azam, who's very elderly and very unwell. Saidi suffered a heart attack in prison and was given several days adjournment to the next hearing. All of them have ailments of some kind, and our position has always been that they have not been well cared for. The fact that the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, based on our submissions, has decided to refer the matter to the Special Rapporteur on Torture is indicative of their assessment of the conditions. But I also represent Mr. Saluddin Kader Chowdhury, as I've been advising his family for some time. There were allegations, serious allegations of torture when he was arrested. Now, whether those allegations are ultimately found out to be true or not, the fact of the matter is those allegations have been made, they're very serious, and there's no investigation.
There was no torture. They agreed that there was no torture. The same people later on, their lawyers first said and then could not provide any evidence, number one. Number two, that the people who were arrested, if you go to Bangladesh, and I am pleased to hear that your family is from Bangladesh, if you ask in anywhere in Bangladesh the name of Ghulam Azam, name of Saidi, name of Kader Mullah, people will say in last 43 years everybody knows.
Toby Cadman agrees that there was an investigation, but tells me it wasn't about the torture allegations.
The investigation ordered by the government was how Mr. Chowdhury had sent a letter to members of Parliament in this country detailing his conditions and the torture that he had been subjected to. So an inquiry, a team of investigators was appointed to investigate how he'd sent a letter, not whether he'd been tortured or not. And then you have to look at whether these individuals should in fact be in custody at all. The government has always taken the position that anyone accused of these crimes has no right to bail. Now, as any lawyer will tell you, there is a presumption in favour of bail, not detention. It is not for us to prove that somebody should be released. It's for the prosecution to prove that they should not be released.
Ghulam Azam and his colleagues have been imprisoned for over a year, in what Salman al-Azami says are appalling conditions.
Even in Ramadan, they didn't give him food for the suhoor. They gave him food at night, which he had to keep for the suhoor. I mean, in a Muslim country.
Sultan Sharif and I spoke for about an hour, but he refused to admit that there are serious concerns about the running of the tribunal. Last November, one of the key witnesses in the prosecution's case told defence lawyers he'd been forced to testify against Delwar Hussain Saidi. He had no idea about the chilling events that were to follow.
Mr. Bali was going to give evidence to the effect that, first of all, Saidi was not the person who killed his brother, but also that he had been effectively told to lie by the prosecution and investigators. So we notified the tribunal that we would be calling this witness. It wasn't made common knowledge. And as the witness the following day was brought to court in the defence car, the car was stopped by security at the gates of the tribunal, and plainclothes officers took the witness, bundled him into the back of a van, and he hasn't been seen since.
Not long after, and further discrepancies were exposed. In what's being dubbed Skypegate, The Economist newspaper revealed that the presiding judge had been influenced by a Bangladeshi lawyer based in Belgium. 17 hours of recorded telephone conversations and over 230 emails pointed to evidence that the two men shared confidential court details and that the man in Belgium was assisting and directing the ICT's esteemed adjudicator.
The Economist newspaper made a series of revelations which exposed the trial as being a farce. It was an orchestrated political maneuver by the government of Bangladesh. It had nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with the judiciary. It gave evidence, clear evidence, of matters of court, confidential matters of court, being discussed with those people outside of the judicial process, perhaps aligned with your party, with your government?
You have asked.
How can you explain
You have
this?
asked 5 questions. What I am expecting, I am telling you.
I'll ask you one question then.
Okay.
Is this a fair trial?
Number
if your
one.
government is interfering in the judicial process?
All the questions you have asked are questions prepared according to my thinking, by those who want to escape this trial. This is a court which is manned by judges of High Court Division of the Supreme Court or senior judges of the country.
And that's one of the problems. The judges in the ICT have been replaced a number of times after accusations of politicizing a legal matter.
Certainly The Economist newspaper discovered evidence, which was acknowledged, of discussion, perhaps collusion, between the president of the ICT and outside persons, and the president resigned. But even more so, we find examples, for example, one of the trials, after he resigned, none of the judges in the case then had heard all the evidence from the beginning. So it was impossible to have a fair trial in that case. So they should have stopped that trial and started again.
Across the land, young Bangladeshis are passionately calling for Saidi and his colleagues to be hanged. Indeed, Sheikh Hasina herself stood up in Parliament before the verdict and called on the tribunal to take into account what the Shahbag protesters were demanding.
Now that, of course, is a direct interference with the independence and impartiality of the judiciary. What followed was the death sentence for Saidi. So they've effectively taken into account the will of the people. And of course, that is very serious.
The Prime Minister is telling the country, the people and everybody that they should hear the voice of the people. I see nothing wrong in it. The change in the law that has been made was to make equality in the right to appeal by both the prosecution and the other side. That is why it was said that while a person who has been convicted can go to the higher court to reduce his sentence, a person who feels aggrieved that the highest punishment was not given to the perpetrator can also go to the Supreme Court and demand that he should be given highest punishment. That is what was only done, nothing else.
It came a bit late though, didn't it? Because you didn't have that at the beginning. It was only when you heard the verdict of imprisonment. And then when everyone started asking for the death penalty, that's all of a sudden, that's when you started to change your tune, isn't it? So
no, it's not our
why didn't you just admit that actually you were dissatisfied with the original verdict?
The families of the victim, if they are dissatisfied, I repeat it, if they are dissatisfied and if they are demanding that they should still can ask for higher punishment, that facility has been given to them, and whichever way you want to interpret is up, you have the right to do that.
Protests are also taking place in support of the Jamaat leaders. Large numbers of Bangladeshis have taken to the streets calling for a fair trial and accusing the government of corruption. Ordinary Bangladeshis have always been largely political, but for the last 1 month their presence on the streets shows just how much endurance they have in their respective beliefs. If placards were matches, surely Bangladesh would be on fire tonight. And there are no signs of abating. The Bangladeshi Prime Minister repeats her full confidence in a court she set up. Her party's president says he has no trouble sleeping over the death sentence delivered to Saidi. And the world watches on, unable to interfere in what Bangladesh has clearly produced as a domestic court. At around 150 this weekend, the death toll is rapidly rising. 42 years after the war ended, Pakistani army officers accused of war crimes walk free, while Bangladeshis turn on each other. Tomorrow evening we continue our special report and look at what could be wider political motivations for the trial. Ghulam Azam's defence team started their closing remarks this morning. It'll take them a week to close their case, and a verdict can be expected within a month after. If the previous decisions are anything to go by, a sentence of any kind on Ghulam Azam will trigger further protests and objections. Given what we know of the ICT so far, is all of this merely symbolic? In part 2, we look at Sheikh Hasina's political opponents and the idea that she's trying to drive them out. And we ask, have Bangladeshis had enough of Islam?